Offensive for the third day in a row, Jordan is bombarding ISIS targets in Syria in a major show force following the brutal execution of a Jordanian pilot. But there are unverified claims by ISIS that very retaliation has killed American hostage Kayla Mueller. Joining me now, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. And with a welcome to you, sir, as always, glad to have you to talk about so many things. First to you, what is the U.S. doing right now to ascertain the fate of Kayla Mueller?
We have our intelligence agencies trying to pore over everything we can to determine whether this claim is correct. Alex, I'm deeply skeptical. I find it very hard to believe that ISIS could tell a Jordanian plane from an American plane, or that the only one purportedly killed in this bombing attack would have been an American hostage. So I don't believe it for a minute. Nonetheless, we're going to thoroughly investigate it and see what we can determine. ISIS has a habit of lying about these things, about their hostages. They don't have much of a history of releasing them tragically, and I just am very skeptical of this claim.
Okay. Let's talk to what Jordan's reaction is to all this in terms of what happened with their down-to-air pilot. They, for a third day in a row, is taking the lead in these airstrikes. The U.S. is coordinating them. Officials there say this is just the beginning. Could and should that mean Jordanian troops on the ground?
Alex, I think Richard Engel was spot on. I think it's very unlikely that Jordan puts ground troops into this conflict. It would result in a lot of Jordanian casualties. I'm not sure the Jordanian public would support that any more than the American public would support that. I do think you'll see a stepped-up tempo of their air attacks, as we're seeing already. I think you'll see an intensification of their intelligence efforts. And you may see Jordan also stepping more into a role of helping to supply and help the opposition to ISIS as well as the regime in Syria. But I don't think it's going to amount to ground troops. Okay,
I want to ask you a little more about what Richard and I spoke about, which was the other major coalition member, specifically the UAE, has reportedly now grounded their Air Force because it was not providing enough support for any potential rescue missions. What do you know about that, and just how willing do you see this coalition as being?
Well, I understand that UAE has, for a period, grounded their aircraft. We're doing everything possible to make sure that anyone who's flying sorties has the backup of an air rescue mission. The reality is, though, that there is going to always be some risk to our pilots, and it looks like in the case of the Jordanian pilot, he was picked up almost immediately after his chute deployed and he landed on the ground. In those circumstances, even the most timely search and rescue may not be enough. So the question ultimately for all the coalition partners is whether they're willing to accept that risk. And unfortunately, that's always going to be present. People like to think that somehow these are sterile operations, but there are always risks to the pilots involved and other personnel as well.
When do you expect the president to send a new authorization for a use of military force against ISIS, and how long do you suspect that will take to get through Congress?
I think we will get the administration's proposal very soon, and that could be within a matter of days. I don't know that it'll actually be text. It might be, okay, here's what we'd like to see in terms of a sunset, and here's what we want to see in terms of the use of ground troops. But I think we will get the specificity that a lot of members of Congress have been wanting. It's not going to be easy, though, because I think on one side of the spectrum with the McCains and Grahams, you're going to want, those members are going to want a blank check, effectively. No limits on ground troops, no limits on geography, no sunsetting of the old authorities. Many of us, on the other hand, want to see something that's narrowly tailored, that gives the president the authority to do what he says he wants to do, which is train, equip the air sorties, but not a combat mission on the ground. And we also want to make sure that this is time limited. So I think a sunset will be vitally important.
Okay, this is a new topic here. This week, Zakaria Moussaoui, a convicted al-Qaeda member, claimed that Saudi Arabian officials donated to the group in the lead-up to 9/11, and one diplomat discussed with him bombing Air Force One. Look, there has long been suspicion that a Saudi role is what's in those 28 pages of the congressional 9/11 report that are still classified. So what do you make of his claims, and should those 28 pages be declassified?
Well, I'm very skeptical of his testimony and really anything that he says. In terms of 28 pages, I have read the 28 pages. The 9/11 Commission investigated the allegations that were made in those 28 pages and was never able to substantiate any of those allegations. So I'm not sure how much stock that we ought to put in them, because we did a thorough investigation of them. But I think in the interest of the public and to kind of demystify these 28 pages, that they should be declassified, I think think it can be done in a way that protects any sources and methods. It's been a long time since those 28 pages were produced. This may not be the immediate right moment to do it, as the Saudi royal family is in transition, but I think they should be declassified.
And why aren't they yet? Who's holding that back?
Well, the administration has the ultimate authority of declassifying that. I'm not sure whether there's precisely something in them or they simply feel the timing is not right. But at the end of the day, I think there's a tendency to overclassify information that may be embarrassing to an ally, it may be embarrassing to ourselves, but that's not a good reason for continued classification. If there's a legitimate source and method issue that'll give public exposure to a still clandestine source, then yes, that's worthy of protecting, and I think we can redact those areas, but I think it should be declassified.
Okay. Next up to Ukraine here. Should the U.S. send military aid?
Yes, I think we should, and frankly, I think we should have some time ago, and I've been advocating this for some time. Negotiations haven't succeeded. I appreciate the efforts that Merkel and Holland are making, and maybe they'll bear fruit, and if they do, that would be wonderful. But economic sanctions and negotiations have not succeeded. Russia has essentially ignored the agreement it reached in the fall in Minsk. It continues to send tanks and other heavily armored equipment and supplies and surface-to-air missiles to change the facts on the ground, to take over Ukrainian territory, to create a permanent frozen conflict, to destabilize Ukraine. And I think we need to raise the cost of that continued aggression, and probably the only feasible way to do that is to help give Ukraine some of the weapons it needs to defend itself, defensive weapons that can raise the cost for Moscow and take out some of these tanks that are crossing the border.
Finally, may I ask you, are you planning to attend when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses Congress next month? As you know, there are a few of your Democratic colleagues who will not be. Representative Grijalva says no. Representative Clyburn says no. Where do you stand?
I will be in attendance, and I'm urging members to attend. Look, I was among the first to say I think it was a colossal mistake for the Speaker to extend an invitation when he did in the middle of the Israeli political campaign and have a head of state coming in to essentially lobby for legislation opposed by the President. I don't think that invitation was a very good idea at all, and I think after we've seen the last couple of weeks, that has been borne out. But he was invited. He has accepted. I will be in attendance, and I think members ought to attend and show him that courtesy, notwithstanding this serious mistake that the Speaker made.
Representative Adam Schiff, your insights always appreciated, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex.
Still ahead, Harper Lee.